Before the city stirred, before the Danfo horns screamed, before the sun stretched over Third Mainland Bridge, Julian stood at the edge of the water, shirt wrinkled, heart raw. 2 years had passed since he'd left. 2 years since he abandoned Ruth and their son, Tolu, without a word. 2 years. But even the seconds that ticked away in the busy city could not erase the weight of that decision. Grief had broken them both, and Julian, unable to face the weight of it, had fled. As the city began to wake, vendors frying Accra, the street buzz of Lagos, Julian walked, each step heavy with the memories of a life he couldn't face. The smell of fried oil reminded him of Ruth's cooking, the way her laughter once filled their small home. The thought of her sent pangs through his chest, but it was more than regret. It was the emptiness that had followed him like a shadow ever since he left. He reached a hotel in Victoria Island. An anonymous night, a fresh face, a fleeting escape from the pain. His phone buzzed with a message from the app he had been using to fill the void. But when he knocked on the door of room 1103, the face that greeted him wasn't a stranger. It was Ruth. The shock of seeing her after all this time hit him like a brick. She was standing there, framed by the door, her eyes unreadable but full of memories, too many for him to process. 2 years. 2 years had passed since he left her standing in the ruins of their life. And now, here she was, alive, yes, but changed. Not the same woman he once knew, and yet, unmistakably, his Ruth. Neither spoke at first. The world outside carried on, indifferent to this meeting that shattered both their worlds in a single moment. Flashback to 2017. Ruth and Julian had lived in a small apartment in Aja, held together by love, laughter, and their son, Tolu. Ruth was a teacher, Julian a sign painter. Their home was modest, cracked windows, leaking roof, and a second-hand radio, but it was enough. Tolu's laughter echoed through the halls, a reminder that their world was still alive with possibility. Their future, though uncertain, had felt solid in its own way. Then came the fever. Tolu's small body struggled, his temperature rising uncontrollably. The diagnosis came quickly, leukemia, and with it, a cascade of bills they couldn't afford. Ruth sold her wedding ring to pay for treatments. But nothing worked. Tolu's condition worsened. He died on a Sunday morning. And with him, their world cracked open. 2 weeks after Tolu's funeral, Julian left. No goodbye. Just a note. I can't breathe in this house anymore. I'm sorry. He didn't know how to stay. He didn't know how to face her, face the emptiness of a home without their son. So he ran. Weeks later, Ruth stood outside a roadside suya spot in Aja, holding a cracked Bible close to her chest. She was in her early 20s, but there was a quiet wisdom about her, an internal strength that Julian had always admired. He was painting scripture verses on a banner at the side of the street, trying to make a living. Their eyes met. It was brief, just a flicker of recognition. She looked away quickly, as if the weight of her grief had followed her everywhere, even into the sunlight. She dropped her Bible, and without thinking, Julian bent to pick it up. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. That's your verse? He asked, his voice soft. Ruth didn't smile, but her eyes softened. She nodded. Something shifted in both of them that day. Their interactions were small at first, boiled groundnuts, ginger tea, shared glances, but each small exchange felt like an unraveling. Ruth invited him to meet her mother, and Julian showed her a side of himself he had long kept hidden. They were two broken people trying to find each other amidst the rubble. Months later, they stood before a judge, a simple court wedding with no frills. Ruth wore a second-hand dress, Julian in a borrowed shirt. There were no grand plans, no lavish promises. Just two people who had found each other in a world that didn't seem to care. But Mama Evelyn, Ruth's mother, pulled her aside afterward. Be careful, my child. Gold that shines too bright can burn your hand. Ruth laughed. He's different, Mama. But even Ruth couldn't ignore the slow changes in Julian. When the money came, when Julian signed his first big contract with a local politician, everything shifted. The man who once painted signs with the hope of a better life now lived with ambition, craving more, always more. The grief that had first broken him now became something he drowned in. He didn't know how to face Ruth, didn't know how to face the emptiness of their life without Tolu. So he worked, and worked, and worked. And slowly Ruth started to feel it. The space between them grew. Julian stopped looking at her the way he once did. His work was his escape, and Ruth found herself left behind. The night before their son's burial, Julian didn't come home. Ruth waited, watching the rain slap against the window. Tolu's tiny coffin sat in the living room, waiting to be laid to rest. The silence in the house was deafening. At 3 a.m., Julian stumbled in, his body reeking of alcohol, his hands bruised from a fight. He didn't speak to her. Didn't even look at her. Ruth didn't ask where he had been. She already knew. He was lost, drowning in a grief he couldn't face. The next day, during the funeral, Julian was there, but barely. His body was present, but his mind was somewhere else. After the service, Ruth found the note on their bed. "I'm sorry, but I need to leave. I can't do this anymore. I don't know how to be here with you." And just like that, he was gone. No further explanation. No apology beyond the words on the paper. 2 years later, Ruth stood at the podium at a public forum in Lekki, her hands shaking but her voice steady. She had been nominated for a regional school grant, and this was her moment. Julian was in the back of the room, his agency handling the press coverage. As Ruth began to speak, Julian felt a sharp pang in his chest. She spoke of resilience, of children left behind by systems that failed them. She spoke of her son, Tolu, and of the mothers who carried both grief and the weight of daily survival. Her voice cracked once, but she carried on. The room erupted into applause. Julian lowered his camera, staring at her, realizing, for the first time, the magnitude of what he had lost. Ruth wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. He clapped, but it was quiet, almost reverent. When the applause faded, he slipped away, unable to face her. The moment had passed, and he knew he had no place in her life anymore. 6 months later, Ruth visited her mother in Abeokuta. David, the literature teacher she'd grown close to at school, came with her. They sat under the mango tree, peeling oranges. Ruth smiled. It was genuine this time, not a forced, tired smile. Mama Evelyn watched her with a quiet, knowing look. "You are smiling again, Ruth." "I didn't think I could," Ruth whispered. Later, Ruth walked alone to Tolu's grave. She left a simple note. "I lived through it. I chose life. Your mother is healing now." Back in Lagos, Julian opened a letter from Ruth. A thank you note. No bitterness. No invitation. Just peace. He exhaled deeply. For the first time in years, he felt the world move forward, without him needing to chase it. He knew the past couldn't be undone, but it was no longer holding him captive. Life moved on. The city continued to hum with its endless noise, but Ruth had found peace. She had chosen to live again, not in spite of her losses but because of them. She was whole, finally. And that was enough.